Hi,
Hey,
Ellen.
so did we run the origins of sex?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
It was just the countdown.
Yeah, okay. Well, here we are.
Either way, we're here. How
We're
are
here.
you?
It's all good. Yeah. Man, I'm confused because my mouse on my big computer's not working. So I've switched to where, okay. So I guess, Darla, we went live on StreamYard, Facebook, and X. We roll the countdown.
Okay. So are we ready to go then?
Donna says we're still backstage. Why is that?
Not anymore. We're live.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
think
to what was that?
our font has changed.
I like it though. I think it looks nice.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I don't think I did that. Maybe did you or Darla?
No, I don't have any of the controls on my end.
That's right, you don't. Okay. Well, I don't think anybody will worry about it.
No,
Yeah,
I like it. I think it looks very
because we
clean.
had Charm before. The
Yeah, we
font
did.
called Charm, at any rate. Um, so,
Anyhow, we thought that we would turn the tables around and I would interview you today and kind of like give you a chance to like talk about your story, like what brought you into
yeah,
this space to want to speak on, transition related topics.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and
And so,
I have a little bio for you if you don't mind me reading it off real quick.
yeah, yeah,
Kind of
sure.
like you do for our guests. I went and
Yeah,
found a little one. So
awesome.
Ellen Jimerson holds a PhD in U.S. Cultural and Intellectual History from the University of Houston and a master's in theological studies from Vanderbilt University. Her specialization is the intersection of Christianity and politics. An ordained Baptist minister and gay rights activist, she is most well known for having officiated the first same sex wedding in Alabama in 2015 and for having written and directed the documentary The Second Cooler in 2013. So, given that introduction, what brought you into activism in the first place? I know you have your PhD. Did was it all? Did politics always pique your interest, or like
Oh,
what?
it had to pique my interest. My father and mother never stopped talking politics.
Yeah,
And I grew up in two of the most extreme places in the country for racism and segregationist sensibilities, which was really, we didn't do our gender news. So maybe after we talk for a little while, we can come back to that because things did happen that I want to get to. But yeah, it was, I grew up in Albany, Georgia, which is the first place that Martin Luther King was put in jail. And it's where the sheriff out Gandhi'd King. In other words, the sheriff understood what the tactics of nonviolent resistance were. And so he knew that King and the others would try to fill up the jails. So he arranged with people in outlying counties to take the extra load of prisoners when it happened. So mom and daddy were very active in that. And then in 1967, we moved to Birmingham, which was more well known, maybe. But Albany was one of the first places that the Freedom Riders zeroed in on, and you probably don't know that much about that, but the Freedom Riders were going to places where segregation and racism were so intense and trying to do something about it. It was not unlike the sit-ins at the restaurant counters, where those things happened. And so politics was a subject of every single day. Daddy and Mama both were just so upset about racism, and they had to listen to it all day long. I mean, people don't realize what it was like, and movies like The Help didn't really speak to that. To Kill a Mockingbird was an outstanding movie that really did show that. And so we talked segregation and integration up until the time I was 14 or 15. And I think I may have mentioned to you that when I was in the 7th grade is when President Kennedy was assassinated. And I was in a math class when that happened. I was 12 years old, 12 in the 7th grade. And we got word over the intercom that President Kennedy had been shot in Dallas, but we didn't have any more news than that. And then a student came to the door and told us that he had passed away. And all the kids around me, both in my classroom and in other classrooms I could hear, just erupted in cheers, clapping, stomping their feet, saying, and I'm afraid to say it on YouTube, the N-word, lover is dead.
We don't need to say it, but
I think there's something wrong when you can't say it, because you're not really testifying to the way it was. But I don't want to get a strike. Yeah. People don't, my little sister was told to get out of her friend's house when they learned that my parents were voting for Kennedy. But yeah, you heard the word a lot, and we heard it applied to us, and it was traumatic. So I think that partly all of that accounts for why I've always felt an attachment or a sympathy for gays and lesbians who have been closeted, because I was closeted too. Because if people found out that you were a Democrat or you were opposed to segregation or any of those things, you could die a social death, and you could also die a physical death, because people were being murdered, Viola Liuzzo and James Chaney. And of course, we knew Medgar Evers. It was happening. And as I say, Albany was one of the worst towns. And my mother told me, of course, later on that she received anonymous phone calls from people threatening to kill her children if they wouldn't stop. And they didn't stop.
Terrifying.
And it is terrifying. It was, and it was traumatic. And I was so glad when we moved to Birmingham, because I thought, oh, we'll get a break now. Nobody will know me. Nobody will know who Daddy is or Mama is. And Mama rubbed feathers the wrong way too, because she brought Head Start to Albany, which was a program directed at mostly Black kids to try to give them a head start on school. Yeah. So people didn't like that either. But the first thing Daddy did when we got to Birmingham, he got invited. He had been a lawyer in Albany and then was hired on to a law school faculty in Birmingham. And so, of course, people were calling him for interviews and stuff. And so the first thing we do, we were there like a week, 2 weeks. he was interviewed on the radio, and they asked him about flying the Confederate flag over the Capitol in Montgomery, which at that time was still being flown. And he was like, "We have no business flying the Confederate flag." And I'm like,
you're like, oh no.
Here we go again. So, yeah, that was my upbringing. And
well, and that makes sense, and you brought up a great point earlier where you feel like this growing up in this area with so much prejudice that was just entangled in the culture, in a way you guys were closeted. And, I feel like that's a point that I want to highlight, that like people can get, maybe it's not a direct understanding of necessarily what it's like to be gay or lesbian, but you can get as close of an understanding as possible of what the experience is like being closeted. Because ultimately, when we grow up in these places with so much prejudice, it doesn't matter if it's because we're gay or because of our political beliefs or because of, whatever reason. If we can't share or talk about these things, there is a feeling of having to close yourself off and hide,
oh, absolutely. I was like, do we have to get into arguments every time our aunt or uncle or somebody comes to visit us? We go to my grandmother's house. Do we have to talk about it all the time? And then when we got past the Civil Rights Movement, we got the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 65. Well, then we moved on to talking endlessly about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went on to talk endlessly about Watergate. So your original question was, yes, I grew up on politics. And so I grew up, to cut to the chase and to make a long story short, I grew up on confronting my culture, being in opposition to my culture, to my church, which so supported segregation, and to my government, with, all the problems there. So, yeah, that was my upbringing.
So in a way, you've always been an activist, basically.
In a way,
fighting for justice and for equal treatment for people, which, is really incredible, especially considering like the times and how closed off everyone was, especially back in the day. So what, I know that you did advocacy for a long time for migrants. What brought you into that world? Was that just like a natural extension of like you grow up fighting against racism, you go to school, you presumably get your PhD. When did you get your PhD and become a minister and all of that?
I got my PhD in 1990, I want to say. And then after that, I went to Vanderbilt Divinity School.
Okay.
And I went there. I remember I applied to get into the program on the day the Twin Towers, it was September the 11th, 2001. And went to Vanderbilt, and that's an entirely different discussion that we could have. It's probably not the most important one we could have right now, but thinking about, I got a BA and a master's at a Southern Baptist university in the early 70s.
Okay.
Then I went to University of Houston and got my PhD. And then 20 years later, I went to Vanderbilt, and the entire atmosphere in universities had changed drastically. Yeah.
How so?
Well, at Samford, which was a Southern Baptist university, we were expected to read. We were expected to write. We were expected to absorb the information. And then when I went to get my PhD at the University of Houston, it was a PhD in U.S. history, 20th century history. And we would read a book like this, like a book, not a booklet, but a book. We would read 2 a week and write papers on them. And then you had to deliver your paper to your seminar. And I would literally be shaking because I was so intimidated. It was like I got in on an accident. It was a mistake, that kind of feeling. So, and then you get to, reading, studying for exams, studying, and writing my dissertation and all those things. And I get to Vanderbilt, the Harvard of the South. Do you know how many, would you want to take a guess as to how many books I was required to read at Vanderbilt?
Oh,
Make it
how long did you go? How long were you there for? And I'll make an overall guess.
I started in January of 2002 and graduated in 2005 in December.
Okay.
So 2.5 years, something like that.
Okay. 100 books.
See, I just love it because I was required to read no books.
What?
No, I was not required. We would be given suggestions. And a lot of it, I mean, it was like the dawning of the woke academia, where there was a guy that I got to know there. He was Black. He was an older student like I was. They call it second career. He had been in the military. And at that point, he was working in, I think, a psych ward, maybe in a hospital. And everything he said was just wrong. He would, like we had a seminar, a class on pastoral care. And one of the questions was, what is the church's teaching on this, that, and the other? I remember the exact question. And he and I both said, we're Baptist. There is no church teaching. Well, what is the church teaching? And I'm like, one of the reasons, because they were saying, diversity and all of this, but they weren't diverse enough for me or for this man whose name is escaping me. But they asked in that class too, if you go into a room and there's somebody in there who's very, very agitated and he's walking around and he's agitated, what do you do? And so my friend said, well, that's when you call security. And the little teacher's assistant said, no. How would that make them feel? You've got to affirm them. And he's like, this guy actually does this.
That's crazy.
And it was like all the time. There was a woman there who was greatly pregnant. She was studying for the rabbinate. And she had to go to a doctor's appointment and she missed a class. Mm-hmm. And the little TA, the teaching assistant, was like, you have to bring me a note from your doctor. She's pregnant with her second child. Yeah. She's studying for the rabbinate. It's so demeaning. And she's like, bring you a note from the doctor? You can't just take my word for it. It was that kind of stuff all the time. Yeah, wow. It was that kind of stuff all the time. But the main thing is we were never required to read a book, and there were things you had to think and things you couldn't think. And like this poor friend of mine, he was told to write a paper about something of interest to him as a middle-aged, I guess you'd say, Black man. And he wrote something about the ladies' man. He got sent to, everybody was like, he's so offensive. As a woman, I'm so offended. Well, okay. That's what happens in universities. You encounter people and ideas that offend you. Right. And so he had to go to, like, what do you call it? Like reprogramming training
Mhm.
at his own expense.
Wow, at his own expense. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's really crazy.
So another thing that I have just been witnessing is this woke thing, for lack of a better word. I used to use the word in a positive way, but just to sort of cut to the chase, on top of everything else, it's like, what are we doing? Read a book.
You kind of witnessed this shift in the culture in your years in university, and I feel like that's ultimately, that shift is what led to a lot of the I guess you could call it like social moral breakdown that we've seen. Gosh, I feel like such a conservative saying that, and I'm not a conservative for anyone listening.
Like,
I'm
how
not.
did I get lumped into this when I'm clearly anti-war, anti-race,
Right.
all the things, and suddenly I'm a TERF. I'm a transphobe.
It's so crazy. And we'll get into what ended up pulling you into this conversation around gender. But first, I want to know more about the advocacy that you did for migrants, because we've talked a lot about that on just in our conversations. So what initially drew you into that, and how did those experiences go on to inform your activism, moving forward from that?
There was a really specific moment when, right after I graduated from Vanderbilt, this whole illegal immigration was bubbling up and starting to be a big issue. And a prominent interfaith, justice-oriented group held a meeting at the city hall. And my husband and I, Al and I, went to the meeting, and I was just horrified at what people were saying. There was a woman, very tall and well-dressed, who said, "Now, you can't call me a racist. I've been to Mexico, and I like Mexicans, but they're Catholic, and I worry about their impact on women in this country." I'm like, nice, you stood up in public and said that. Perfect. Then a Black man stood up and said that he couldn't rent out his rental property for Mexicans, and this is a quote, "running around half naked." And I was thinking, and then this good old boy who was a medical doctor was running for the Senate or the House of Representatives. And he does this good old boy, this I don't know, I'm just as confused as you are, but I just worry that with their health care being so bad, that if they come here, they're going to bring leprosy with them.
Oh.
Leprosy.
Wow.
Which A, is not highly contagious, and B, can be treated with penicillin. So what are you talking about? And there was a round of applause, and the Presbyterian, fine fella, not the sharpest blade in the justice drawer, if you ask me, but he starts applauding, and he says to this man, his name is Parker, "There are a lot of people here who want to see you in Montgomery." And I looked at Al and I said, has Frank lost his mind?
Yeah.
And so I left there, and other people who had been there, who went to my church and so forth, basically thought I was there because I didn't like Mexicans either.
Oh.
And I'm like, no. Yeah. And then I thought that this had happened just as I graduated from Vanderbilt, where I was studying liberation theology as it comes out of Latin America, or it came out of Latin America. And I thought, with all of my education, all my degrees, all my education, with my experience growing up in the home of civil rights activists, if I didn't have something to say, then all of that would have been wasted on me. So a friend suggested I take what they call an immersion trip. I mean, it's not really, it was 5 or 6 days, but to the border with a group. And it was a group called Border Links. And it just, you know, I had the question, it makes no sense that all of a sudden hundreds of thousands and millions of people are crossing a border illegally. Why? Why wouldn't they just come legally? What's going on that they're leaving and not coming legally? So I went to the border, and after 5 days, I had been introduced to the impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement on the peasantry, which everybody knew would displace people. I knew about free trade agreements, which is what NAFTA is. I visited with Border Patrol agents. I went to shelters. I heard all up and down the border some of the same stories, that if they pick you up and it's extremely hot and you've been in the desert, they'll turn the heat on and you'll beg them not to, and that's torture by the Geneva Conventions, manipulating temperature. I've heard that. I heard it at the border. I heard it from a man I interviewed from a movie who was in Atlanta. I've heard it from other migrants. Yeah, the worst thing you can do is say, I'm freezing. I don't have on a shirt. Please turn the heat on. No, they'll turn the AC up. And they say they don't do that. And I talked to the Border Patrol agent, the head of Border Patrol in Tucson. And he said, no, that wouldn't happen. Because if it ever happened, it would be a criminal offense, because the migrants have already been under so much pressure and then been out in the desert and all of that.
Yeah.
So I came back and I put together a little PowerPoint, and everybody was inviting me to come and give my PowerPoint and show my slides and talk about my experiences. And I was, hailed as a great hero from going into the dangerous border, which I was never in any danger. Although I did hear what later turned out to be a drug-related execution.
Oh.
Yes.
That's frightening.
Well, I mean, I didn't know what it was until afterwards, when the State Department said, you probably don't need to be going to Nogales anymore. That was in Nogales. But where was I going? Where did I leave off? So when I came back, I was doing a PowerPoint, and people were telling me, you've got to find a way to reach a broader audience, because you're talking about things that nobody's talking about. I didn't know NAFTA had anything to do with it, they would say. Mm-hmm. And I would explain about what NAFTA was and, what the goals of NAFTA were. And of course, it was Clinton who signed NAFTA into being. And it was Clinton and his head of Homeland Security, which was called something else then, Doris Meissner, who set up the federal policy of funneling migrants into the Sonora Desert, where there is no water, there is no shade, anticipating, and it's in writing, that they would die. And this would act as a deterrent to others coming, because word would get back to the sending communities and it would stop. But that it didn't. It was a failure in terms of stopping migrants. And I learned that the United States has 2 separate legal systems based on where you come from. If you come from Canada, France, Western countries, for most intents and purposes, you can come with a simple tourist visa. But if you come from Africa, Latin America, most of Asia, you had to come with a work visa attached to you had to have a passport I didn't say that right. If you came from Canada, you could come with just a passport. If you come from Africa, Mexico, or Asia, most parts, you had to come with a visa attached to your passport. In order to get a visa, you had to prove to America, the authorities, that you had enough money back home, enough property that you would go home, that you wouldn't stay in the States, because that's where your investment would be, where your money would be, your house, your motorcycle, all of that would be. And so you had to demonstrate that you had a certain amount of money in the bank. Well, when you think about all the indigenous who were displaced by NAFTA and later on by CAFTA, at the outset, they don't qualify. They don't hold deed to land because they live on the lands communally, and they don't have money in the bank. And that's so many of the people who have come. And they could either, so they were being pushed off their lands. There's a long, complicated story there, and I explain it all in my movie, Second Cooler. If anybody can get around to watching it, it all explained.
When we post this episode on YouTube, we should put a link to your film somewhere.
The Second Cooler, yeah.
So that people can go watch it.
Yeah. It is posted on YouTube.
What?
Yeah, there's my visual. That's the main graphic. And you see the person who came up with it did such a good job. That's the Capitol. And those are body bags that were photographed in the medical examiner's office in Tucson, because so many migrants had been pulled from the desert. And there's Canada's flag and Mexico's flag and a little bitty American flag.
Yeah.
All of that symbolizing NAFTA.
Yeah, that's a really, really powerful visual, especially with the body bags. That's very striking.
And I've seen them, making the Second Cooler. I went to the medical examiner's office, and that's where the title of the movie came from, The Second Cooler, because Pima County had to install a second morgue refrigerator to house the bodies, so they wouldn't go bad,
Yeah.
And it sometimes takes months to years to figure out who the person was. With DNA, they have a better chance of identifying the people. But there have been babies pulled. One of the correlations I wanted to make was a correlation between the 4 little girls who were killed in the church bombing in Birmingham, which we in Alabama and elsewhere still talk about, the 4 little girls. And the remains of, when I made the movie, so it was released in 2012 or 2013. There had been 2013.
2013.
Thank you. Do you know how long it runs?
No.
89 minutes, 40 seconds. An hour.
Wow.
89 minutes, 40 seconds. So the bodies of 16 girls had been recovered just from Pima County. That doesn't take into account California, Texas, New Mexico, and then, of course, little boys too. But I ran the names of the little girls and put up, I'm trying to make that connection, and I think I did.
Yeah.
There was one little girl who was coming, I think, Guatemala. She was trying to meet up with her parents in Atlanta, and she died in the Sonora Desert. I think her body temperature was 110 or 115 when they found her. She was wearing little pink sneakers with the little butterflies on the bottom. there was another little girl who's become kind of an iconic figure, whose name is Joseline, and she was 14. She had come from El Salvador with her little brother, and they, I think, were trying to get to Los Angeles, again, parents. And she had come all the way from El Salvador, all across El Salvador, all across, let's say it's Guatemala next to El Salvador. And then Mexico itself is extremely hostile and a big stretch of land. It's 1,000 miles long or something. Mm-hmm. So she had come, she had gotten over the border, and she got into the Sonora Desert. It was January, and she just couldn't walk anymore. And the guy, the coyote, left her behind, intending to take her brother on and then come back and get her. And when they came back, she had basically frozen to death. It gets really cold in winter in the Sonora Desert. And so anyway, that's, I have a gajillion stories, but maybe that's enough to.
Well, I mean, it certainly paints the picture. I mean, God, what a tragic world we live in sometimes, I think, as I hear all these stories. Okay, so you made your film The Second Cooler in 2013. What piqued your interest into LGBT activism? I know earlier you said that you kind of have this understanding of what it's like to be in the closet because in a way you went through a very similar experience growing up. So I know that would play a part in your activism, but what was the moment that, like, I guess, piqued your interest in this field? Just given it is such a niche field, to talk about. I feel like especially within the church too. Now, I will say Baptists are different from Lutherans, which is my background. And we didn't really
Southern Baptists, yeah,
stuff in the Lutheran church.
Yeah.
If we did, it was, they certainly were not positive about it in any way. So what brought you?
Well, part of it is that immigration and LGBTQ issues and women's issues are not separate. And this is one thing I began to understand and read about and hear about. And I had a very dear friend who was a gay man. He had lived in Tucson, and at the time I got to know him, he was living in Los Angeles. But when he would be in Tucson, he would go across the border to the shelter there. And I don't know if, people picked up on his, had gaydar or, whatever. And I mentioned that to Larry, and he said, well, it was either that or the fact that I had a gay pride sticker on the trunk of his car.
Oh, that'll make it hard to hide it.
Yeah. And so they would come out to him. And in fact, I have a picture, if Darla can find it, of a gay couple that he got to know. You want me to find it, Darla? That's them.
Aww.
And you can tell they're also indigenous.
Yeah.
And Larry got to know everybody at the shelter and has lots of pictures and lots of stories. I kept saying, Larry, you got to let me help you put together a book because, and then he was HIV positive, he and his husband. And then they got COVID and his husband died and then his dog died and then he died. So, but this couple were indigenous and gay. And they had come from, I think, southern Mexico. And so when they got to the border, they were picked up by Border Patrol and they were separated because one of them was, let's say, 17 and the other was 19. So one was a minor and one was not. So they split them up, which is just I just can't, so I don't know what happened to them. And then I've got a picture there, Darla, of there were a couple of, let's see, let me back up. In 2009, Hillary Clinton, who was Obama's Secretary of State, engineered the overthrow of Honduras, democratically elected president whose name was Manuel Zelaya. And they kidnapped him at night and, in his pajamas and all this stuff. It was illegal. The coup was illegal, and clearly the U.S. participated in it. And so the coup and removing the person who was trying to help keep indigenous on their lands, keep water in the hands of indigenous, which is a lot of what NAFTA was about, was getting access to water rights. So it sent Honduras spiraling downward into poverty, and also into the thing that almost always happens in this situation. There was a persecution of gays and lesbians. There was an explosion of femicide, which means to kill women because they're women, and a persecution of trans people. With me hearing stories of trans women being kidnapped, killed, chopped up into little pieces, and their body parts thrown in a ditch. And one of the people who pointed the finger at Hillary Clinton was an indigenous leader whose name was Berta Cáceres, who was trying to protect the water rights of the indigenous, and she was assassinated. And she said before she died, she literally pointed her. I wrote an article about this that was published in Latino Rebels. At any rate, among the people coming out, and they didn't come out necessarily immediately after the coup, which was in 2009, but they came some years later. So it was in 2014 when all these little kids were coming out of Honduras, trying to escape the gangs, and their parents had no option, so they would come unaccompanied, and Obama and Clinton sent them back. They admitted they would be safer here, but they sent them back. They keep sending these messages. And so there was at least one or two caravans of trans women who came out of Honduras. Now, I'm indifferent to whether they actually thought they were women in men's bodies, or whether they were cross-dressers or what. I'm indifferent to that question when it comes to these particular people. But they were picked up. I've got pictures of them, if Darla can find them. One was a woman whose name is Roxana Hernandez, and the other that's Roxana. She was from Honduras, and she was picked up by ICE. She was HIV positive. They wouldn't give her meds. She died in their custody. So, and nobody was talking about it. None of the immigrant advocates were talking about it. Nobody was talking about it. And she was represented, her family, by a transgender law firm. And then there was another woman, six months later, who was from El Salvador, I want to say. And her name was, what was her name? Johanna Medina Leon. And she also died in custody. I think they put her in a room with no bed, and she laid on the floor slept on the floor, cold floor, for 5 days. And then they sent her on this long, they're always moving prisoners around, not keeping them in one place so they can't form relationships, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, she died. And so a big point I want to make is that not only were the activists not interested, and this is why I'm always talking about read the document. If you're upset about Skermeti, read it and see if what you're upset about is really there, or the Don't Say Gay bill. Read it. It was the same with comprehensive immigration reform. It was a bill that only served to further militarize the border, making life even harder for people coming across. It expanded the guest worker program, which is a program of indentured servitude. And it offered this path to citizenship. But in order for people to get on the path to citizenship, the border had to be completely militarized. Now, what does that even mean? We've got drones, we've got cameras, all of which I've seen. I haven't seen a drone, but I set off a helicopter once when I walked off the road. But my point is that even the advocates, even the people who say they're on the side of undocumented people, were not curious at all about what they were promoting. And so DACA came along, if you remember DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And everybody was like, oh, this is wonderful. Obama at last is doing something wonderful. He's just wonderful. DACA required at the outset that you turn yourself in, that you report to the authorities that you're here without inspection, which necessarily means your parents who brought you here are here without inspection, your older siblings, your younger siblings. If you're 16, you can apply, but if you're 13, you can't. I mean, it's just 2 and 2 always adds up.
Yeah.
And then the major outlets, like I've been interviewed by the Los Angeles Times and some of the bigger, and I'm like, you don't know what this is. It is not protection from deportation. Please read it. If you're Los Angeles Times is going to interview me, they need to know what they're talking about, and they don't need to say it's a protection from deportation, which it never was. It was a 2-year work permit and the ability to go to a university. But after that, what?
Right.
And suppose you didn't get the deferment, all of the problems with it. The activists, all the good guys wouldn't say anything about it because Obama could not be challenged. And even with the coup in Honduras, even with sending the kids back, all of these things. And then the major sort of leftist news organizations like NPR, like Democracy Now!, like the New York Times, had nothing to say.
Wow.
And so, knowing what I knew, about, immigration being a gay issue and being a women's issue, and not just why don't they come legally, which is a fair question, but an advocate ought to be able to answer the question. And
right.
that I've never encountered people with the major organizations, having an answer. They thought their good hearts were enough, which is a lot of what we're seeing now with people supporting the medicalization of children. Your good heart and the fact that you've accessed the moral high ground is what matters. It doesn't actually matter what puberty blockers do, what it means to be on testosterone for 8 years, what it means to have your breasts amputated when you're 14, all of the things that go with it. And so I think it kind of led naturally to this, but I guess before we get there, there's the part about where I officiated at the first I was the first ordained Baptist minister. There's that picture.
Yeah.
So it had everything. I mean, look at me. I'm white. The couple is lesbian. They're black. And there's that stole, that photogenic stole. It went everywhere. It wound up in the Italian papers. It wound up on Jon Stewart and Rachel Maddow and everybody. But so to me, it was just not, I didn't realize what an issue it was going to be for people. I got a call and said, we're going to have, on the day that Obergefell v. Hodges takes effect, we're going to have this big wedding week for people who haven't been able to get married before. And this couple, we want them to be like the first couple, the centerpiece couple, and they want a Baptist. And so I was asked, will you do it? I got a call on a Friday. The wedding was on Monday. And I was like, my question was, well, am I available? Yeah, I'm available. So yeah, I'm a minister. It's what I do. If they want to get married and now it's legal. And of course, it caused a huge backlash in the church that had ordained me. And people calling me names, people saying, my daughter died. She was 16 when I was editing the second cooler. Mm-hmm. And people felt called upon to say horrible things about her.
Oh my God. That's awful.
Just another stupid animal lover, that kind of thing. And somebody put out in the, internet said, Ellen Jemerson pimps out her dead daughter for her own political gain. So people will say anything. So like when, your mom has said things and you've said things about I'm like, I know full well what people will do.
Oh, yeah. You've experienced the hate firsthand, arguably your whole life since you were a very small child.
Yeah.
The subject matter might change, or rather, people's justification for their hatred might change over the decades, but it's very much the same pattern. Almost.
Yeah, well, it's the ignorance, not knowing. I don't see how anybody could call themselves an advocate for immigrants and not have a clue about NAFTA.
Yeah.
Now, I don't expect you to, but then you haven't been for 20 years.
But I'm also, I'm not an advocate for immigrants,
Yeah. So, but or Skermetti.
Yeah.
Read the thing. It's 5 pages, 6 pages, it's not long.
Yeah. And I remember when I first offered my testimony for that, and there was quite a controversy around it, with people not wanting to believe it, wanting to call me a liar or a grifter.
Yeah, I love that one.
I know. It's like,
yeah, where's the cash? Where's the cash?
I said that to someone online. Golly, I think it was this morning, where someone was like really seriously trying to imply I was a grifter. And I said, please, link your source, please. I would like to, if that's the case, I would like to know where all the money is.
Yeah.
Because, it's, I don't know. I feel like a lot of this pattern happens because people, they have these feelings of ill will, and everyone deep down, ultimately wants to be considered a good person. So they'll take up these causes, almost, I'm going to use the term virtue signaling because it communicates what I'm trying to say, but I don't mean it in an insulting way. I think it's an unconscious thing that people do.
Yeah.
And then they're prideful and they don't want to back down. you know? So then when they meet an advocate like yourself or like me, that brings into question their whole worldview, people can react very, very negatively to that. You know,
Well, I
unfortunately.
tried to tell people that, where's my book? I had to change my way of thinking too. I was thinking, oh, here it is. You know, I published this book.
Oh, yes.
It's called Rainbow in the Word, LGBTQ Christians Biblical Memoirs. There you go. Very good, Darla. Thank you. And I'm really proud of this book. But when I put the book together, it had not occurred to me that trans was anything other than another form of gay or lesbian. And I mean, I gave a speech, a little homily at a memorial for the Pulse, the people who died in the Pulse massacre in Orlando. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I was young when that happened,
Yeah.
but that happened, I believe, if I'm thinking correctly, that was in 2016 or 2017. So it was early in my transition as well. It was quite a big moment for the LGBT world back then.
Well, I even wrote a I still stand by this theological point, but I wrote a little piece, I don't know what it was for, called An Argument for God Being Trans. Because in John 1:14 it says, Word became flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and Word was with God. And so you've got this transformation. I still stand by that, although I don't think it's the same thing, because I hadn't thought it through to this point. I mean, however you take this, whether you take it literally or as part of whatever, God changed form, but God didn't change God's substance. You know, which is what we're seeing now, that it's not just the outward appearance, is that there was something, you know, God was never Word, God was always flesh. And that, so, I mean, I get interested in these kinds of things.
Oh, no, that's very interesting. It's almost like the phenomenon that we have going on today, because, you know, I've had my fair share of interactions with, you know, Christian communities that, you know, are very supportive and I would say, you know, affirming. And they've had similar ideas. They didn't use the reference to the Word becoming flesh, but they, and it's been so many years since I've read the Bible. I used to have it all memorized, given the school that I went to. But there's a verse in there where it talks about God being both male and female and neither, essentially. And they would often bring this up as like an example of how God transcends the gender spectrum. And so, therefore, they believed that the substance, like our souls, transcended that. And according to these affirmative Christians, that could be how, you know, someone could end up in the wrong body, which in a way is sort of an inversion or a twisting of the actual verses in the Bible that they use to base these beliefs off of. Have you run into a belief system like that as you were becoming more of like a I suppose like a gay rights activist within the church?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It sounds like because you were such a pioneer, essentially, in this movement of, well, being one of the first, if not the first minister to officiate a same-sex wedding,
First Baptist minister.
First Baptist
Yeah,
minister.
a legal same-sex wedding. So,
Yes.
and maybe the first in Alabama, but I don't know who got there first in other places.
Yeah, well,
it's a lot about the clock.
You were one of the
Yeah.
first. It seems like you encountered a much more conservative Christianity, which, of course, is familiar to me because that's what I spent my young childhood in. Before the world changed, essentially, and
Yeah.
Society took a different turn. And then people's minds opened up a little bit, but then of course it went wrong in another direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what piques your interest to continue speaking, in the gender landscape? Because it can be rather intense, and these, topics, I don't know, get really, really dark and really challenging at times.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's so much fun and so interesting to get to know people like you and your mom and Aaron and Hendrix. And then, what happened to Hendrix? It's like Hendrix, our friend, who is an attorney, is a lesbian, transitioned from female to male, and is now detransitioning. She was assaulted by trans activists in Seattle over the weekend, maced or pepper spray, and got a black eye.
So, I believe it was Antifa.
They call it trans Tifa.
Some people
heard that. Yes,
online.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that Antifa is real, but I don't know. But they were mean-spirited people who, go ahead. You have a thought on that?
I was just gonna say, Antifa, they say it isn't like an organization. They say it's like a grassroots thing because they don't have like a widespread or like an internal structure for things. But they're organized enough that I feel like they could be considered one. I know that goes against their philosophy though. But they have, they've committed, they've harassed many, many, many people over the past few years who have been willing to speak out against, the ongoing medical scandal, involving pediatric transitions. They're very staunch advocates for child transition. So if anyone questions that narrative, then Antifa will go out of its way to cause issues. I know both myself and many, many people have gotten our fair share of threats from Antifa members, which is very concerning, especially given the context of the situation, given that it is such a widespread scandal with such serious consequences. And then these people are like, well, you can't talk about that.
You can't question that.
Yeah. Or even, some of them are so radicalized that like what I believe, and I haven't had a chance to speak to Hendrix since the incident, but what I believe had incited it was Hendrix's friend, our friend Ari, was wearing a red hat, and these people just assumed it was like a Make America Great Again, like a MAGA hat. And so that's what had incited.
That's just nuts.
So I heard had incited the attacks, which is insane to me that we've gotten to a place in this country where you can't even go to the park wearing a red hat without someone assuming that you're a political opponent and then immediately resorting to some kind of verbal or physical violence. And I laugh, but out of shock mostly. It's not a happy laugh. It's shocking. It's horrifying that this is where we've gotten in the world. It's very reminiscent of earlier when you were talking about your upbringing in regards to the racism and how that prejudice was so pervasive and so entangled in the culture. I'm starting to see almost like not a resurgence of that, but like it's like that, like I was saying earlier, that hatred just changed form. Like racism was no longer a good justification, so they took up another cause to express their ill will, essentially.
You can get people to believe any. There's an expression that I think I got from a British mystery or something like that about believing 6 impossible things before breakfast. I think that was from Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, I think
6 impossible things before breakfast. Well, I have told this story, but I don't think I've told it on this show. In Albany, once they began to desegregate, then, I don't remember exactly when it was, but one of the great pleasures in my life was in the summertime for my mother to take me to the library. And it was air conditioned, I think. And, you had all those books there and, you could sit and read. Well, they got it into their heads that if a Black man came in to the library and went back into the stacks, he would rape a white woman. Now, the thought of that, I mean, like, just commit suicide, just jump off a bridge, why go in the stacks in this small library? It's
like
preposterous.
What go is thinking those things and then projecting them onto people. You know what I mean?
So they shut the library down, and they shut the swimming pool down, and they shut the tennis courts down. Also, so we white women wouldn't be raped by Black men. It's just preposterous. In that day and age, it's just preposterous.
Yeah.
But people believed it. They'll believe anything. Yeah. That's how Germany, it's all these things, because people will believe these preposterous things about other people.
Well,
and I think that's what. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you have like a slogan that's either emotionally charging enough or is catchy enough and people repeat it, then that they can condition themselves to believing just about anything. When you repeat something so many times,
there's
a tendency for people to lend more credence to it.
I believe in God the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm.
You say it enough and that becomes what you have to believe. And you don't really have to believe all the things. I mean, you can believe it in a way, but you don't have to believe all the things. But right. Yeah, you're exactly right. You make a good point. When you get a catchy slogan or a catchy liturgy and you have people say it all the time,
Well, and just even with something that's like emotionally charging enough, like with the whole protect trans kids slogan, where they're just with that statement, they're implying that these kids are in some kind of imminent danger, which clicks into a certain place in people's brains. And then they repeat the slogan thinking that they're doing the right thing, protect trans kids. And before they know it, they're full supporters of sending these kids down an irreversible medical pathway that will have permanent, if not lasting, permanent and lasting consequences.
Yeah. I mean,
children.
If you really care about kids, don't you want to take 5 minutes and just look into whether puberty blockers are reversible? But just plain good sense tells you that a double mastectomy is not going to be reversible.
Yeah.
I mean,
or even estrogen early on.
No, it's not reversible. But some of this to me is like just walking around good sense would tell you not to remove the healthy breast of a teenage girl. And then, there's the doctor, Olson Kennedy, who says, well, if she wants some later on, she just go have them put on.
Yeah.
That's not
Well,
how it works.
that's like my doctor's telling me now that I have A cups that I'm walking around with, thank goodness they did shrink a little bit with fat redistribution, but they're not ever going to be gone unless I get the surgery. And that's just what doctors will say. They'll say, well, you could just go get a mastectomy. As if
there's nothing to it.
Surgery that's going to
like getting a haircut.
Scars, yeah. And
Yeah.
they're just like, oh, it's like nothing. Like, just, you don't like them, go get them removed. And it's like, well, it's not that simple. It's not.
It really isn't that simple.
But that's part of the toxicity of this ideology, where it's like, it's just part of your gender journey,
Yeah.
and they
I know, and people are saying, well, they're so worried for the trans kids and they're going to be even more isolated. And I'm like, what do you think is happening to the lesbian girls? What do you think is happening? They're being erased. The gay boys are being basically erased with no thought. The women who have worked so hard to have safe spaces and set aside spaces.
Yeah.
Who's actually getting marginalized here?
Exactly. And it's an uncomfortable truth, but that's where I'm so glad to have folks like yourself or like Jen Specht, that are speaking out and calling out this scandal for what it is on all sides, because it's so multifaceted. It's having impacts in so many different areas. Makes it almost hard to pinpoint and talk about it as if it's just one scandal, you know what I mean? Because you have the medical scandal. Well, that extends, so many broad areas in regards to children, vulnerable adults, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the attack on women's rights that is, ongoing.
It's crazy.
It's horrific.
I cannot believe how many women are falling into this, or how many friends I have whose kids are lesbian or gay, and they couldn't say, no, you're not going to have a mastectomy. No. You're going to grow up, all the things. I'm baffled. I like to think if that had happened to me with one of my kids, that I would have just said, no way, but you don't know, the power of narrative.
It's the power of a narrative, but even beyond that, because when institutions adopt that narrative, then, like people have lost kids for saying no. That's what's so poisonous about this ideology is it's, essentially.
You can have them taken from them.
Yeah.
Like Alexandra. Yeah.
Like Alexandra, or like what I'm very positive would have happened to me if my mom said no. My doctors were very plain and clear about that. And it happens, we've heard stories about, kids being removed from the home and placed into foster care because their parents didn't want them to medicalize. Not even that they were closed off to like calling them a different name or whatever. They just didn't want them to medicalize. In which case, in some states now, that's grounds for removal of the child, and then they put them in foster care and medicalize them anyways.
That was one of the things I had to talk about with SCOTUS has agreed to hear a challenge to a Washington law that facilitates runaway minors' access to gender-affirming interventions without parental notice or consent.
Yep.
And so they're going to hear a challenge to that law. So we can only hope it goes in the way it should go.
We can hope and we can advocate and, do what we do.
SCOTUS is, people want me to dislike everything SCOTUS does because they associate it with Trump. But so far they've made some decisions that were Well, it just makes it common sense for one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can agree with people's decisions and not support everything.
Other stuff. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And that's just part of being a human being. You know,
Yeah.
none of us are going to agree with every decision that somebody makes.
And especially
you might even find certain people to be very unlikable, but if
Yeah.
they do a good thing, or they, you know, follow common sense, they stick up for people being victimized, we can praise that act and still
Yeah.
not like someone, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to work with me, but there are so many people who are like, oh, I see you're transphobic. I don't want anything to do with you. You know, it's like with immigrant advocates or LGBT advocates, it's like you have no idea what it is I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we're supposed to be on the same side.
We should be, but there's you know, almost within the community division going on right now. It's pretty complex.
Well, I just can't get over how hostile people are to Hendrix and to Aaron. The hostility. Yeah. Aaron Kimberly.
Oh, Aaron Kimberly. Yes.
Yeah. Ari, I don't know. I'd like to know her. Or him. But I don't know Ari. No, but Aaron just, and he's involved in some really interesting research having to do with trans people. But I mean, and the pushback of Hendrix is just, I don't know. It's just mind-boggling.
It's a complex issue and a complex space. And, you know, I'm sure you can imagine all of us that got sucked up into this have complex personalities in one way or another. So
yeah.
And, you know, all of us detransitioners catch flack to one extent or another. Hendrix, you know, fortunately and unfortunately went viral when Hendrix came out as a detransitioner. So I think thereby Hendrix is
J.K. Rowling stood up for him, which
Hendrix,
of course, she's anathema.
Yeah, totally. But because of that going viral, Hendrix drew much more negative attention, I feel like, from medical activists than like say even I get, you know, and I get my fair share. Like,
I know you
most
do.
of my DMs online are awful. But
I'm so sorry. I hate that.
It's just a fact of speaking out in this space.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll get a few of those messages just by working with me. It's
well, bring it on, you know.
Space, you know.
Yeah.
It's very reminiscent of the same prejudice that like you grew up facing. Unfortunately, the subject has changed, but it's the same.
Yeah. The cast of characters has shifted.
Yeah, but it's the same hostile spirit behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, so what are your plans for the future of your advocacy? I know we have the show going that we're trying to grow, but do you have anything else on the horizon?
As far as me getting really involved in it, no, because at this point, you know, you can only do one thing, I think. Well, I mean, Chris Hedges, maybe, you know, somebody's brilliant. Or what's his name? Norman Finkelstein. He's great. He can keep all the balls in the air at the same time. But I mean, like now, I've got a sermon to give on Sunday, so I have to write a sermon. So, you know, if you do anything else, it's like, you know, I don't have the energy I had when I was younger, you know. So I don't know. I guess something could come along, you know. I wish we could. There's so many things that I feel so strongly about, but I can only really know enough not to be a danger rather than a helper, you know, just from what I've seen of the other activists. It's like you need to pick a lane and stay in it and learn what you need to know about that particular issue and make sure you got it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we could go into our gender news segment since it's honestly, I was so excited to get into the conversation.
I know. It's fine. It's fine.
That earlier.
It's fine. You know, I think everybody has heard. Well, here's another observation. It's the so many of the organizations that were so attuned to civil rights and all of that are going. I mean, the ACLU. I clued into them with the Johnny Depp trial several years ago and Amber Heard, because they're the ones who got the idea that it would be great if she would accuse Johnny Depp of spouse abuse. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but I'm like, the ACLU, I thought they were supposed to be the one defending the rights of people like Johnny Depp, not trying to ruin his life to make money. And then the Southern Poverty Law Center. What? But of course, again, I clued into them years ago. You know, I just try to keep my eyes peeled. But I think so. The ACLU's lead litigator, so they were going to rule on trans athletes in girls' sports. And Leor Sapir, who's with the Manhattan Institute. So Chase Strangio is the litigator for the ACLU on this. And he said, left out of Chase Strangio's analysis is even the slightest awareness that there might be other stakeholders other than queer people, as he put it, whose needs, interests, and rights are negatively impacted by what queer people want. The idea that there might be trade-offs here never even enters the picture. And then he said, Strangio's argument is based on the world before 1972, when girls were excluded from sports based on various stereotypes. So I was, of course, glad to hear that SCOTUS did rule that trans athletes, and of course the way it's reported, that in itself is a story. You know, I put on Facebook a meme somebody put where it says SCOTUS has barred trans people from participating in school sports, which is not true.
Right.
It's not even kind of true. You know, look it up, people. If you're going to make a meme out of it.
It's a total misrepresentation.
It's such a misrepresentation. Then the challenge to the Washington law having to do with runaway minors. Pamela Garfield Yeager, who's a licensed clinical social worker, published a piece once again confirming that autistic children are disproportionately persuaded they're trans. She's not the first. Oh, this is good. You know, I was trying to think of something that I could do for this show when I'm in Berlin.
Yeah.
Did you hear this? In Berlin, yesterday, the day before yesterday, there was a men's only event for men who say they are lesbians. They're called the Dolls, and it's a workshop. And it was billed as a trans femme lesbian meetup, no women allowed. But and this is like peak wokeness. So it's not just in the States. It said they will not tolerate, yeah, that's the poster, the oppressive behaviors, including racial fetishization, white only, gender and sexual normativity, colonial Islamophobia, Zionist discourses, or capitalist beauty standards.
Okay. Wow.
So what exactly are y'all going to talk about?
So it's a men's only lesbian event.
And racism will not be tolerated, or colonialism, or Islamophobia,
or capitalist beauty standards.
And Al said, "What?" I was telling Al about it. He's like, wait, what? Wow. And the Dutch Health Council was expected to advise on youth gender medicine today. An unusually broad and credible coalition has challenged the Dutch protocol in a mainstream national newspaper, and it includes Pieter Omtzigt, one of the Netherlands' most prominent former MPs, and institutional watchdogs, Doreen Sellenrod, a clinical psychologist formerly affiliated with a gender clinic, emeritus professor so-and-so, former politicians, clinicians, writers, and people with lived experience. And so it says, the advice may lock the future of Dutch care into the very treatment model being reassessed internationally. So I couldn't quite understand. Yeah. I didn't quite understand if they are feeling hopeful or if they're feeling concerned that this, like it said, will lock the Dutch model in, lock it in.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I know, not everyone knows, that the Dutch protocol was one of the original models coming out that affirmed, for gender affirming care.
Yeah.
Puberty blockers.
I said for minors.
For minors, yeah. So the Dutch House of Representatives has asked for a new assessment. So I guess it's good that they're asking for a new assessment, but I think some people are feeling some danger that it's going to just sort of reify. So I just bring that to you for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's an unpredictable era we live in, so who knows the outcome will be. But
so that's all I have for gender news.
Okay. Well, I think that's a perfect little segment. And I feel like that'll be a good spot for us to close off on and begin to wrap up, because we are at an hour and a half.
Are we? Gosh.
It goes by fast, doesn't
it? More stories.
As we can go into more stories in the future.
Yeah.
We will see, because, like I had said earlier, your activism through your upbringing is really interwoven in with, the same phenomenon that we're seeing.
Yeah.
With the whole, trans medical scandal and social scandal. It's,
it's a medical, a social, and a journalistic scandal. Certainly. Like I'm saying, the same with comprehensive immigration reform, that journalists could not find a single thing to say about Obama's policies. But the minute Trump is elected, an explosion of interest in children in cages and deportation, like Obama wasn't the deporter in chief. But at any rate, yeah. My hermeneutics of suspicion.
so much to be suspicious over in this world. It's wild. All right.
Well, I am so glad that I have met you and met the other people that have been on the show, and your mom and Darla and I are working together, which is wonderful.
Yes, we are so thankful for you, Darla, for helping out with the show.
Yeah.
Lord knows if I was in the booth, it would be a disaster.
Start pushing buttons.
All right. Well, I think that that's a good note for us to close off on. Do you have any like last thoughts before we head off? Or
no, I just no, people, be careful.
Yeah.
Read the documents in question. Be careful.
Be careful. Read your documents and
don't fall in love with your politicians. I don't care who they are. Don't fall in love with them.
That is a great note for us.
Actually, that is sort of like my sermon, because it's sort of fortuitous that I drew the day after the 4th of July.
Okay.
So on one hand, you've got empire, and on the other hand, you've got the kingdom of heaven on earth. And which is it that you really want?
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that symbolism. All right. Well,
all right. So
I think this is a good note for us to close off on. And I can't see on my end if anyone tuned in, but if anyone did, thank you for tuning in. And
yeah, they did.
We will be posting the recorded version at some point. It'll be posted on Ellen's YouTube channel, Ellin Jimerson.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Jonnie. Thank you, Darla.
Thank you for talking.
Yes, you're welcome.
You have a good night. Have a good night, Darla. Have a good night to our listeners.
And we will see you Tuesday.
Yep.
All righty. And we roll out.